So I'm really excited to be doing this show today. I've got a guest that I think a lot of my followers are going to appreciate for a number of reasons. First, I think whatever you think of him, you can't argue that he's a man of principle, or rather you can only argue that he's a man of principle. The other thing I think that's going to draw my listeners to this gentleman that I'm speaking to is a reverence for this document behind me. You know, I do a lot of work with the liberty movement, and I hear a lot of people talking about the importance of standing by principle, but a lot of those folks, as like all of us, often do more talking about principle than actually standing on it. And certainly, you know, standing on it, perhaps armed, ready to defend it. So that's another reason why I am very interested to hear from my guest today. And last, but by no means least, one of my big shticks is political identity, political tribalism. And this gentleman has kind of come up against that in a rather big way recently. And so you can probably tell by looking if you're watching this on YouTube, but I'm speaking today to Ammon Bundy. So Ammon, thank you so much for just making some time to talk to me. Like, I really appreciate this.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You bet, you bet. Well, and let me just say off the bat, thank you for being a man of principle and for standing for the principles that really motivated the creation of this document behind me, which I think most people can see is the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. So thank you.
Well, thank you again.
All right. So now I'm not going to do the biographical introduction because, I mean, if anybody doesn't know the name Ammon Bundy, they should kind of, you can stick your name into Google. I guess I'll just make reference to a couple of standoffs, right? One in Bunkerville, Nevada, one in Malheur Ridge, Oregon. And if that doesn't jog everybody's memory, I don't know what will. But the reason I wanted to speak to you now, I think is in some ways best captured, Ammon, by this headline that was written about you recently. Ammon Bundy quits militia movement in solidarity with migrant caravan. Now, that speaks to something that the media has also been claiming about you, which is that you've given up the militia movement for the resistance movement. And I want to ask you about, well, you didn't join these movements. It's news to you, right? So tell me about what this means, like why you're being put in boxes. And I would like you also to kind of ponder how it is you came in the past to be the de facto leader of a movement that you didn't consciously join. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's what's happened on both ends, right?
Yes.
I was thrown into being a militia leader, and then now I'm thrown into being whatever the liberals want me to be, you know. And but so it's very interesting. It's typical, actually, though, what the mainstream media does, or, you know, and all in all, I've always felt that I've stuck to the same principles, that the principles have not changed. And it actually, this example or this incident has shown how, you know, how the standing on principle will contrast both sides.
So let's state clearly, because I know what the principle is on which you're standing. Let's state it, and then let's think about how it is that leads you to be friendly with this group back in 2014, 2016, and then have the same group turn on you, more or less.
Well, so I guess if I was to try to sum it up, you know, I am a Christian man who believes that Christ is the creator of the world and our savior, and that what he has taught in the scriptures is something real and something that we are better to follow, and that is that to love your neighbor as yourself. And you know, the incident in 2014 where they came against my father and my family,
federal government, right? We're talking about
federal government, yes. I mean, I think you can categorize it as the federal government came against my family with 213 armed personnel. It's literally an army. They had helicopters, MRAMs, you know, and they were authorized to use lethal force. Fully geared, you know, like you would see them in another country, in Iraq, which is a whole nother issue. But that's how they came against my family on American soil in southern Nevada. And I came and stood with my father because I felt that strongly that his rights, and if it was allowed that his rights were to be infringed upon, that many others' rights. And so I felt that it was out of love for my neighbor, love for my family. I went and stood, and we did the best we could peacefully. And everything that we've done has been peaceful. That's been an interesting thing. But we were willing to stand and say, you're not going to take this from my father, and you're not going to take, anything else from our neighbors as well. And then the same thing in Oregon happened, where there was another ranching family in Oregon, in Burns or Harney County, where the similar agencies, federal agencies, were taking property and imprisoning this family. And again, I felt strongly moved to stand for my neighbor because of a love and a duty that we have to stand for our neighbors. And by doing that, if you will, the right or the conservative, or kind of the meat and potato, red blood American, rallied behind us and supported us, and in many different ways, but basically we kind of threw me to the, I guess, to the top, and my father and family to kind of the top of this, conservative, liberal, not liberal, I would say liberty. That's what I'm looking for, liberty movement, if you will. Which gave us a lot of opportunity to speak and to express certain principles that are captured in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and it has given us a great opportunity, a great platform to speak and to teach and to do the best we can about, what is really happening to us in this nation, what the principles of freedom are, and how we must stand and how we defend that. And for the most part, I was, I would say, beloved. I know that's a strange word, I guess, but
No,
people express a tremendous amount of respect towards my family and I, and we kind of enjoyed that. And then there was an extreme amount of hate, and towards us on what we would call the left, and where they absolutely hated us. To the point where I would get death threats, and which is just fine, because you stand for something, and that's what you kind of expect. But at times it was vile. Most people were respectful, but there was a tremendous amount of hate that was expressed because of what we were standing for. And then earlier this year, and late 2018, there was the whole caravan issue coming from Honduras primarily, and the refugees fleeing there and coming to the border. And there was an incident, a crisis at the border. And I had several people asking me, like, what I thought. And I had to admit to them that I really just didn't know the facts. And so because of it was, multiple people asking me, I felt like a little bit of a duty and a desire to actually look into what was happening. And what I found was something a lot different than the conservative movement, if you will, was portraying, and that President Trump was portraying. And so I expressed that, from what I have found, that the majority, by far the majority of the people, were truly, seeking for a better place and fleeing from an area that was, maybe fleeing is not the right word, but they were leaving an area that gave them very little promise. And then I also saw the influence that the United States has had upon Honduras and the southern Central America and southern South American countries. And I began to see that, that what was being reported on both the left and the right was incorrect. So I began to do the best I could with the facts that I had, presenting really what I felt and what I saw was happening. And because I did not have this contempt for these refugees, and because I would not align myself with President Trump, I was literally, crucified on social media, and I was fine with that. But what it did is it revealed to me, without going too much further, because I'm sure you have some questions or thoughts. But what it revealed to me was a true insight of what a lot of and majority of the followers in this movement, if you will, really were, like who they really were, that they're really not. And I got to be careful, because I think now I'm stereotyping, so I want to be careful. But there was a lot of people that were not willing to consider the principle, one of the two main commandments, which is love your neighbor as yourself. That they were more willing to align with the Republicans or with Trump or with conservatives or whatever else with whatever else they were wanting to align with. They were more willing to align with that than the teachings of the Lord. And this has been an issue that I have run into from time to time that has never surfaced. And my plea was to look at the facts first. Stop just taking the word from somebody who might have a motive. And then also to look at the true principles. The Constitution, what it protects. It protects all people, to be honest with you. And it is actually a great document that protects us in the ability to love our neighbor. And so that's kind of where I'll leave.
And you've said so many things that I want to ask you questions about, and I barely know where to start. Let's start with this. People on both the left and the right who, one time would have supported you and then not, and it switches. They most of them sincerely experience their commitment to, let us say, certain policies or an ideology as based on principle. So let's say the folks who were supporting you back in 14 and 16 on the militia or the conservative side would have said that they were doing so because they believed in perhaps the Christian principle of love thy neighbor, or the constitutional principle of individual primacy, which I know you espouse, right? But then often when push comes to shove, we discover that the commitment to the tribe or to the ideology wins out over the commitment to the principle. And it seems to me that this is part of human nature that is exhibited by the majority of people. And the people who, as you did in this case perhaps, go to the principle, even when that moves you superficially from one ideology or group or tribe to another, are the minority. Now, it seems to me that saving our country depends on more people doing the latter. Now, you've really been on the sharp end of this. What do you think about that? How do you explain that? I guess I'm kind of asking you, do you think you've learned something about human psychology, and if so, what, by virtue of this experience? And perhaps specifically you can speak to how it can be that folks who previously, that you espouse the primacy of the individual consistently, and now therefore can't write off all of the immigrants as bad people, let's say, and their right to come to America as it's not having it right. That you can take that position, and then people who would declare to be standing on the exact same principle as you, not only disagree with you on the position, but will throw hatred at you for taking it. How do you explain all of that? What thoughts do you have?
Well, I can't completely explain it because it's not very easy to explain, but there are several examples of this in history that have truly affected the world. And one thing that one thing that I can say that might shed a little bit of light on this is, so the liberals, and I'm going to use this to, I got to get rid of something here. I apologize.
Yeah.
It's taking my screen up. So the liberals, if you will, and I have a hard time categorizing, people, because of, I don't want to, do the same thing that many people have done to my family and to others. But
So let's
anyways,
say people who tend to self-identify as progressive.
Yeah, progressive. Yeah. So that sounds good. Well, they loved this. They tried to take and use me as their poster boy, because I was willing to stand against Trump, or against the thought that, and I don't know what their motives are. All I know is it was convenient for them to grab a hold of me and use me, and they wanted to interview me and do all of these things, to try to promote their ideology. But it wasn't based on any principles either. So then, and of course you have we have examples such as, like, well, I mean, you can use extreme examples such as like, what the Nazis did to the Jews, I mean, they literally, in the name of the nation, and they were standing for, like, their nation, and for their flag, and for their patriotism, and for, all of these great things that seem like principles, and for the right of, them to be prosperous, and for the defense of their own property, and all of these things that they would, profess. And then they would go and raid the Jews, throw their, all their stuff in the street, arrest them, and eventually we know that they would end up taking their lives after putting them in concentration camps for years and years and years, and starving them to death. It was a horrible situation, and that's not the only example I could use. I could use many, many examples, but it was all done in the name of their nation, in the name of the strength of their nation, and all of that. And that's when you begin to forget the principles, you begin to forget the individual, and you put something else like a group or a nation, or even a family or a tribe. You put that in front of the individual, then that's when you see horrible things happen. And that's what I was warning everybody about. That was my main warning, because I fear, even though I'm grateful for many of the things that have been done since Trump has been in, I'm not fully satisfied with those things, but what I have always said, and what I still kind of hold as the jury is out, if you will, is Trump, and are those who follow him so closely, are they just nationalists? Or are they for true freedom? Are they?
And another way of asking that, Ammon, I guess, just to kind of tie this with what you were saying before, is, are they collectivists, or are they for the individual? That's what you're asking, right?
Well, yeah, because collectivism, nationalism, socialism, fascism, communism, and nationalism, along with others, are all collectivism, right?
And this is why you draw a distinction between nationalism and patriotism, which I believe is very important, right? Because in America, patriotism is about a commitment to these principles which honor the primacy of the individual.
But there's a battle in the patriot community of whether they are aligning themselves with the nationalists, which is or nationalism, or patriotism. What does the American flag mean? Does it mean that a strong nation that's in control and has the power to force their will upon the individual? Or does it mean the individual being free to be able to express themselves, and to truly be free? And that is what my warning was, and what I was trying to draw by showing this contrast of how they were treating and willing to just categorize these refugees as all criminals. And I spoke up against it, and I didn't mind that what happened. I kind of assumed, honestly, that was going to happen. I had tested the waters before about, refugees and certain other principles, and, kind of got a little bit of a backlash. So I knew what was probably going to happen. It happened a little more, with a little more, I don't know, force, I guess, than what I thought would happen. But we have to make a decision as a people. Are we going to stand for the individual and be patriots, or are we going to stand for our nation only and be nationalists?
Okay, so let's go to the immigration issue that kind of kicked off this part of your experience more directly and unpack this a bit, because I think you've mentioned in other interviews that obviously there are some people who are not coming for the right reason, but the majority are, right? Broadly speaking, is that fair? Yes. Now, legally, if you're an asylum seeker, the first country where you are not in threat of your life or livelihood, is the country where you must claim asylum in international law. So let's say if you're from Honduras and you've gone through a couple of countries, Guatemala, Mexico, to come to America, you're not coming to save yourself from harm. You're now coming for a better life, which is legit. I mean, here I am as an immigrant that came from Britain, where things aren't too bad, to the United States for better life. So I support any immigrant doing that. But we as a country, and I'm not sure this is different from the position that Trump articulated on his better days, right? Says, we as a country, now I'm talking about America, can rightly, surely draw that distinction and say, look, if you're here from any country that's more than one country away, right? So not Mexico, then de facto, you're not claiming asylum here. Because if so, you would have stopped in Guatemala or in Mexico. You're coming to basically immigrate. And we have a system for that. So, let's call it what it is. You go to the back of the line. Now, that would be true, surely, of most of the people coming in caravans, right? So right. Isn't there a legit problem here? Let's talk about that. And then, because of your commitment to the Constitution and therefore the rule of law, I'm going to be interested in your opinion about sanctuary cities as well. But we'll do that next.
Yeah. So, part of what you're expressing, and one thing that I have said, and is that nowhere did I ever express that we were not to have some type of process or some type of, to make sure that criminals don't come in. Okay. But one of the, when you go into the history of the Constitution and you really study, about immigration and about naturalization, and you start to really, understand what the intent of the founders were. And then you also see some of the incidences where, because the founders, were so, most of them were so open to basically allowing people to come and immigrate here, whether they went through multiple countries to get here or not. And one of the reasons they were so open to that, or some of the debates that they had, were, for example, some of the founders said, well, if we allow them, then what will happen is that those basically that I'm trying to think of the right words, and I apologize. Those that have escaped, or that are looking to get away from the law in Britain and other countries will come to America.
Fugitives, basically. Yeah, it'll be a refuge for fugitives.
Guess what? Yeah, fugitive. Yeah. I apologize. Yeah.
No, you're good.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened. Right? And you know what the founders said? You know what the debate was about? Well, if these fugitives come over from other countries, in fact, they were worried that all the fugitives of the world would come to America. Well, guess what? That did happen. And the argument was, well, but the rule of law, the law would be effective in this country, and that would take care of the issue. Okay, so and that was the debate, that our law and our law, our basically our law and our judicial system and all of that. If someone come over here, committed a crime and against another person, that our law would then rectify it. And that they allowed, there was no border patrol, there was no wall, there was no anything. They allowed pretty much anybody for almost 2 centuries to come into the country freely from any country, whether they're fleeing because of a situation or whether they just wanted to migrate here. Okay, mm-hmm. And but the law stayed the same, meaning, and I'm giving you the perfect scenario. What I mean is that it didn't matter if someone came from Europe and come over here and stole property from another person, or if they were already a citizen here and stole property from another person. The law was equal. It was not a respecter of persons. And so the law would resolve that the victim was restored and that the perpetrator was punished. Mm-hmm. Okay? And the founders felt like that system, our law, was strong enough to allow people to come into the country, and therefore they didn't have to man the borders. Mm. Okay? Yep. And that way we could be a free country flowing in and out. Now, the other aspect of what I was saying about the immigrants, which was very important which is very important, is that rather than trying to make new immigration laws and trying to change and build walls and borders and more enforcement at the borders and all of that, why don't we fix our welfare system first? Because I was taught that if you feed the birds, more birds will come. It's a fact. I could go out in my front yard, I could spread seeds out, and at first nothing will eat. Then they'll find that it's there, and then they'll tell their friends, and pretty soon if I keep spreading seeds out, I got more birds in my front yard than I can handle. Well, that's what we have. We have a system where the liberals think that it's okay to just give other people's money away and to give it freely, and whatever else they call it. And we have attracted a lot of people from all over the world that are coming here not for a better opportunity. I guess, no, I should rephrase that, because they're coming for a better opportunity, but they're not coming here to work and live the American dream. They're coming here to for the handouts. And
now, just so I'm clear, are you saying that this is a majority or a minority of immigrants who are coming now?
I'm saying I don't know, okay. But I would say there is a tremendous amount of people that are coming here because they can get, pretty much free healthcare, housing, food, education, and that is a fact. And that is contrary to freedom. And so my point by making the stand that I did, at the beginning of the year when it comes to the refuge was, look, we don't need to necessarily, we don't need a huge, security and walls and everything at the border if we, got rid of the government welfare system where the people that come over here were willing to come over here, work, to produce, and then if that's what attracts them, then those that come over here that did want to commit a crime will allow our judicial system and our system to function properly, and it would filter or vet all the people out that needed to be vetted out. And that there's no other way that I could see to be free. There's no other way that I could see for things to float, for me to be able to go out of this country and to come back, and for other people to come and go, for free trade. Otherwise, you put walls up and border security, and you got to pay for that, and then you restrict free trade, you restrict the movement of people from country to country, and you have destroyed certain elements and principles of freedom.
I think that's a very strong case. Now, that is a case that can be made, or is being made, one might say, theoretically. Because right now we do have the welfare state. So whilst if I'm hearing you right, you're saying, consistent with the founders' vision, the borders should be open and there should be no welfare state. All the while we have a welfare state. Do you feel that, which I am not advocating for here, similarly, I'm just recognizing that that's the mess we're in. Does the nation have a right, or indeed should it, whether it has a right or not, should it say, okay, we are going to control who comes across the borders because we do have this welfare state, especially given what you said, that there are people being attracted to the country for an easier life, to get handouts, to get some of the beneficiaries of basically a social democratic state that we live in. And shouldn't we therefore do some of what I think Trump and some of his supporters are saying, which is, no, this has to be done in an orderly fashion. You don't get asylum if you're just coming here for a better life, including perhaps getting some of our benefits. You go to the back of the queue, and by the way, it's a very long queue. And by the way, Mexico, and by the way, Guatemala, if people are coming through claiming that they want asylum in the US, in international law, they don't, because they're not stopping in your country, which is a safe country, because they're threatened in, practically, how do we deal with this?
So I'll ask you this question. Do I have a right to say no to the government taking my income and giving it to those people, creating a welfare state? I evidently don't have that right. Well, I do have the right, but it's at the risk of my life.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's with the barrel of the gun. So they're saying that they have a right to take my funds, or take my, income, my production, the fruits of my labor, and to give it to whoever they choose, and they create a welfare state. And then by creating a welfare state, then now they have to increase border security.
Yes, okay? No, that's right. I'm with you. Yes.
And so do I have a right to say no? And does the government have a right to do something different than an individual has a right to do? I don't believe so.
That is a fundamental question on which the answer to which much American libertarianism and conservatism hinges. If it's not good for the individual, it's not good for the government. I mean, that's
and if the individual doesn't have the authority or the power to do it, then how does the collective individuals have authority and the power to do it, and or the government, in other words? And so, I keep, again, I have to go back to principle. And I also, how do I say, oh, well, let's just go ahead and fix this immediate mess and forget the cause of it? We've done that long enough in this country. That's why we're a mess.
We're a mess because we only ever try and treat some of the symptoms without ever treating the cause.
And the principles are all there, Yeah. If government would get completely out of welfare, then there would be and our judicial system would truly punish crime. Mm-hmm. Okay, mm-hmm. Because both are failing. So mm-hmm. if we would get out of the welfare system and our judicial system would function correctly and punish crime committed to victims, mm-hmm. then we would have no problem with our borders. None.
So can I ask you this question? I mean, you could just refuse to answer this, of course. But if I say to you, given that we have a welfare state, how would you deal right now with the migrant caravan crisis?
How would I deal? I would basically do the best I could at vetting whether they're a criminal or not, and then I would invite them in.
So you would have open borders, essentially, except in the case of criminals. So
yeah, because
even with the welfare state, right?
Well, again, how how can it's so difficult for me to be able to say, look, you know, the government has the ability to say that they're going to give only our money, you know, and I just can't. It's very, you know, I just can't, you know, differentiate the difference between, you know, someone who says they're an American and someone says that they're, you know, from another country. And maybe that's my problem, because, you know, I hear things like, well, we got to take care of our own. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean I take care of myself and I don't share anything with anybody else? Or does that mean I only take care of my family? Or does that only mean I take care of those in my church? Or does that mean I only take care of those in my city or my state? Or does that mean I only take care of people in my country? So, like, what does that mean? Where's the limit?
Okay, so I think the natural answer to that question for most people would say the people who, the limit is, in the first instance, citizens. This applies to Americans. They have constitution. Now, you can say we all have individual rights, but the constitutional protections of those rights applies only to Americans. Now, you could say, reasonably, I think, that anybody who's within the jurisdiction, i.e. within the borders of, and that seems to be a legitimate question that we might ask now in the 21st century that the founders weren't asking in the 18th century for all the reasons you said, which was we didn't have a welfare state, and they were like, let them in. The criminal system can handle everything we need to handle. But we live in this different world. So there is a natural, it seems to me, a place to put the boundary, which is American citizens.
Right. Well, and so citizens is an interesting word as well. You know, American citizens, or do we mean citizens of the United States, right? Because that is a complete different thing. To be a citizen of the United States is not to be a citizen of an American citizen. And so, but also one thing that maybe causes me to have a difficulty of drawing, you know, a line and saying on this side of the line, we take care of each other. And on that side of the line, you're on your own because you're outside of our jurisdiction. And that is, you know, through a study of the Constitution, I believe that the founders set forth a growth pattern that was supposed to spread throughout all of the willing world. And that was, and I'll just lay it out. And this is one of the reasons why statehood is so important, because the federal government was given certain powers to go and to buy, or even through military force, it needed to be rightful, to go and get control of certain vast lands, primarily uninhabited lands, right? And then the design was to encourage the people to go claim it, to go out and claim it. And then once it became populated enough, then those people can create their own legal jurisdiction called a state, broken down into subsidiaries called counties, and they can begin to rule and govern themselves according to their own basically local government customs and cultures, or local customs and cultures, and they could be free. That state government and the county government was only there to protect the individual rights, but it was a jurisdiction. And then that this expansion of this growth pattern of taking an area, making the people free and encouraging the people to inhabit it, creating states, then turning the Republican form of government over to the people to govern themselves. This was a growth pattern that was supposed to go well beyond 50 states. You know, I don't believe the founders said, okay, 50 states, this is supposed to be. You know, no, it was supposed to be expanded to, you know, like all the territories. I believe it was designed to go up into Canada, down into Mexico, down into South America, even over in Europe, because it's a perfect design of United States defending each other in the defense of an individual's right. It was not supposed to be just the mainland of North America. And I think that's very clear. And that was something that was, that was something that was universal among the founders. There was very little argument. There was no argument about how vast this expansion of freedom could spread.
But are you saying there was an intent for it to spread into other sovereign states that had their own constitutions and didn't need to become part of this model?
Well, you have Mexico would basically, at some point, there was kind of a line drawn, after the Mexican-American War through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, that basically drew that southern line, and that was kind of the boundary. And then, Mexico eventually, went through a revolution process and declared their independence, and basically kind of, in some ways, copied the United States. But yes, this growth pattern is clearly designed to go far beyond the borders of what we have. Now, does that mean they have to be within the jurisdiction of the United States? Well, I think it was designed that way, but it was never designed by, to force a people. It was willing. For example, if the northern states of Mexico wanted to join the United States, we should be more than willing. We should love it. We should encourage it every day.
Okay.
Come join the United States.
Now, there's a fundamental difference, though. This is interesting because there's a fundamental difference between the states actually, let's say, the polities of those states, the representative bodies, let's say, petitioning to become, new states of the United States of America, and people, individuals in those states, walking from those states where they haven't done that into the United States of America for all the benefits that they get.
Yes, I agree. But again, we're talking about principles of freedom and individuals. Why does one person on one side of the border have a right that the other person doesn't? They don't. And
so
I'll explain. They don't have any more rights. The United States and let's like Arizona or California, they were designed to protect the individual rights that both people have on both sides of the border. Okay? They were designed to protect. And now don't get me wrong. They were designed to protect that individual rights, right? And the idea was, the founders was to expand this protection as far as you can. But what we're doing was saying there's a border and you're only protecting one side of this border. And I get that because that's the power we have, the jurisdiction we have, right? But that's not what we're saying. We're saying, look, you have to stay on the other side of the border, and we are not going to protect you, and we're not going to let you come over here. We're not going to allow you to have what we have, and that's because America has become greedy. We don't want to lose what we have. So we're not allowing anybody else to come in because we don't want to lose it. And that's not loving your neighbor.
So would you say we have a moral and perhaps a constitutional duty to actually accept anyone that would come in, regardless of the welfare state, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, that is a tough question. I'm going to think about it for just a second, because I shouldn't even have to think about it. My answer is absolutely yes.
And you would say yes to a moral and a constitutional duty?
I would say yes to a moral for sure. And I would say that I see no evidence in the Constitution where we have power to build a wall and to keep people out. I have to say that.
Okay, this is great. So what would you say then? So just because this is great, this is we're extending from principles. We're going where this takes us, where the principles take us. What would you say to the person who says back to you what you said earlier in this discussion, which is, look, hold on, I'm sick of having my stuff taken at the point of a gun to pay for these things. I'm already giving away too much, and I can make a stand on the wall because there's a lot of support for that. In other words, I can stop the taking here. So that's where I'm going to stand. And if by building the wall, less of my stuff is taken to pay for, in other fewer people, and the people that it is being taken for, although I don't like it, at least I do have some fellow feeling for as Americans, because they're fellow citizens, and you may not think that means much, but I, as the income taxpayer, do. What would you say to that guy? I mean, you could plead to make an appeal to his better nature, and you could make the moral case. But at the end of the day, look, stuff's being stolen from me. I don't want it to be taken by this federal government at the point of a gun. So, now I'm on the same ground as you. How do you convince him? Or how would you reply to him?
Well, there's a couple ways. No matter how, one is, let's go ahead and put several $1 billion into a wall, and that process is going to take more from you. Right? It's going to cost money. So the federal government is going to have to take more from you.
Okay, what if I believe in the long run I'm going to be better off? Short-term pain for long-term savings.
Then this is my answer. This was going to be my second answer anyway.
Okay.
If you think you can clean the outer vessel and not clean the inner vessel, and that's going to bring peace and hope and tranquility and prosperity, then I would have to say to you, you're nothing but a fool. Because that's what we're doing. We're saying we're going to build a wall and we're going to try to clean the outer vessel, and the inner vessel is so dirty and so messed up that we can't get a clean drink of water.
Yeah.
And that's the fact.
Okay, so this goes really well with what I said I was going to ask you about, which is sanctuary cities. Now, sanctuary cities seem to give you something of what you want on principle, but with something of what you don't want on principle. Because a lot of these sanctuary cities they're certainly, let's say, progressive cities. So the people making them into sanctuary cities are giving these individuals from, outside America a place to enjoy the benefits that you think we have a moral duty to give them. But the same people want to extend the welfare state, extend the mess in other ways. So given the reality of that, the political reality, what do you think about sanctuary cities? And what do you think about Donald Trump's idea that, okay, we will let them in and we will put them in the sanctuary cities?
Well, I actually kind of enjoy Donald Trump's ideas, and, because he understands that would destroy the sanctuary cities.
Now, hold on. If it would destroy the sanctuary cities, doesn't that go against the moral case you're making for our having to take them in?
No, because the sanctuary cities right now are upheld only by welfare, and primarily coming from the federal government. Okay, so they're upheld by this theft that I've been, talking about.
Sure.
And so, if you have a sanctuary city that basically is going to function on the merits and the work and the effort of the individuals in that city, they're going to be productive, then yeah, go for it. I think that's great. That's only going to strengthen America. But if you think you're going to bring all these people here, and then the rest of America and the rest of the people in the city that are actually producing is going to give them a living, produce, and give them everything, all the welfare they need, then that's incorrect. Again, we're back to the principles. Principles. And so if you have a sanctuary city that wants to base its existence off the merits of their citizens, if you will, and off the work and the production of their citizens, man, I applaud that. But that's not what they're saying. That's not what they're professing.
So given that, maybe this idea of letting in all the immigrants and putting them in the sanctuary cities is the fastest way to get our political reality to align with the principles. Because the only sustainable response at that point, perhaps, would be, okay, we're letting them in, but now this taking from some to give to these others is going to have to stop because it's going to break under its own weight. So would Ammon Bundy say, right, that he does support, for this reason, for reasons of principle, Trump's idea of yeah, okay, we'll let them in and put them in the sanctuary cities because that might move our practical reality closer to the principled reality that Ammon would like to see?
Yeah, well,
I'm putting words in your mouth a bit, but you see what I'm getting at. What do you feel about it?
I totally get what you're getting at, and I hope that your audience is too, because this is intriguing.
Yeah.
However, the problem with that, and the reason why I'd have to say no, is because experience, the practical experience shows that the government will just force those who have to give it up. And so all that will do is mean more force upon the good, producing, honest, individuals of this nation.
Sure.
And because the government will keep taking to pay that bill to feed, to house, to medicate, and to do all the things that basically our government has freely given. And so for that reason, I say no, because all it will do will encourage and enact more force upon the good people of this country.
So if for that reason, would Ammon Bundy say that his stance to move us practically more in line with principles on immigration would be, we open the borders, but only after we've taken down the welfare state, period?
Yes, I would definitely say that. However, and I'll say this again, I think that we do ourselves a great injustice, even now, by not allowing the good people in. And because we need that, we have always thrived on that. Our labor, our labor force has always depended on that. A lot of our, inventions, a lot of our, even just the fiber of our communities, have depended on good people from around the world coming here and being great producing citizens. And if we just say, we're not going to do that anymore, we will dry up.
So one way of kind of implementing that would actually be to widen a rule that exists under NAFTA. Under NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, Mexicans and Canadians, who are the other signatories to NAFTA as well as the United States, have a right for a rolling job visa. It used to be called a TN visa. I don't know what it's called now. If they can show that they have an offer of a job from a United States employer, then it's basically a will issue situation, right? They can take that job offer and then they're allowed in. Now, would a solution be to have open the borders to anybody that can get a job offer before they get here, and then keep them closed to the rest to make sure that they're not going to come in and get the welfare? Or would you still say, let them all in, we'll somehow sift them whilst they're here? Although, how do we do that? Because we know the statistics about the disappearance of people waiting for court dates. Like, would you detain them in mass detainment sectors? Because there are so many in these caravans processing. How would you manage this?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So if we allow someone to come across the border, right, and or many people come across the border, now the question is are they going to come across the border and are they going to produce for themselves, right? Through free trade, through a willing buyer, willing seller, through free trade. So that's kind of the first question. If we are going to allow them to come across the border and fend for themselves, produce for themselves, right? And we're not going to feed them, right? Then under that circumstance, we've talked about this, basically let them come in. But what you're saying then, well, we have this welfare system, that is the reality, right? And evidently, we're not going to change that. So what do we do now?
Right, that's the question.
Do we just let them come in and, live off of the government? And in that case, there is no solution.
Ooh. And yet we have
no solution, because you need people to come in. You need them to feel and do the things that the immigrants have done in this country since the very beginning. You need them. But you can't bring them in and take away the whole reason why you need them by feeding them without them producing.
So what does there is no solution mean in practice? What would the policy be?
But the thing is, under the welfare system, there is nothing that can fix it.
Oh, agreed. And yet we still have to decide what to do with the people coming through the border.
Okay, so but then why would we? What I'm saying is there's no solution to immigration if you have a welfare system, because building a wall is not a solution.
Okay.
Building more forces to keep people out is not a solution. That's not a solution. You know, and I could go into a lot of reasons we could do that, but that is not going to fix it.
Right, but a choice has to be made, right, Ammon? I mean,
right,
a choice has to be made. So we either have to, let's say, you know, keep them out completely, let them in completely, or some version somewhere in between. Given that no answer is a solution when we have a welfare state. Trump has to do something. Our congressmen have to do something. I mean,
so this is there is no solution, but these are the options, right?
Yes.
Because it is not a solution.
Yes.
We either take, you know, billions of dollars out of the, you know, American taxpayers, or I'm not going to say taxpayers. I'm going to say out of families and individuals' pockets.
Yeah.
To pay for both the welfare system and we take even more billions of dollars more out of the American family and individuals' pockets to pay for a wall to protect the welfare system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both. So to me, as an individual and a family, well, just take the money for the welfare. Don't take it for the welfare and the wall.
Okay.
And the border security.
What if you believed that by putting up the wall, or in some way keeping the borders closed or mostly closed, we were in the long run taking less money from families for welfare? If you believed that, what would you then say the best of the bad options would be?
Well, then it comes down to, like, you know, I guess, who are you going to give the money to? But what we have seen, and I think you could probably, I mean, it's very hard to dispute this, is that the welfare system, you know, has just grown and grown and grown. Yeah. And I don't think that it's just going to stop growing under the current circumstance just because we stop the immigrants from coming in. And there's a lot of arguments, you know. In fact, I know personally several illegal immigrants that have come in and they pay their taxes, they never collect. You know, there's hundreds of thousands of them. Well, what about the amount that they're putting into the pot? You know, and that's tax money is going back to somebody, you know, maybe them, I don't know, but it's going back to somebody in the welfare system that is, you know, that is basically benefiting from that. And we've disrupted this, you know, free market through, you know, taxes and through welfare. And then now we're trying to compensate for it by building a wall. And, you know, hopefully I've been able to articulate that I don't believe that there is a solution under this scenario. Yeah. And so why would I spend billions of dollars building a wall, building up a border security, and that could actually be used against me if I need to flee the country, or maybe my children, and also makes it very difficult for free trade to come back and forth, you know. And there's a whole bunch of examples, or a whole slew of reasons why I don't want that border there, beyond just the tremendous expense it will take to build and maintain. And so, just if you want not a solution, but if you want an option, I guess just leave it the way it is.
Okay. Okay. I love that I wasn't expecting that we would be exploring this issue in this depth, but I'm really glad we did, because, as you say, this has been a really good discussion. Do you have? Say again.
Just one other thing.
Yeah.
If I've got an issue in my home, right? I got a house, you know, keeping issue, you know, that it is my duty as a father and as a husband and as a man, it's my duty to identify that problem and resolve it so that my family can, you know, go on and have peace and prosperity and enjoy and be protected. That's my duty, right? It's not my duty to say, well, there's this problem here, so I'm going to just ignore it, and I'm going to try to solve it by, you know, building a bigger door on my house, or, you know, whatever else it might be. I mean, I know that it's time for us to solve the problem, the true problem, and it's all based upon the principles.
Yes. Yeah. And so it seems that if you were Donald Trump, and if you were the president and you were thinking about immigration and solving that problem, am I correct? You'd start with the welfare state. Like that's where you put your energy, right?
I would end the welfare system, and I would also end corporate welfare and state welfare as well. I would end it, and I would allow the American people to keep that in their pocket and use it inventively like they always have, and prosper and grow this nation beyond what we can even imagine. And on the same side, I would correct and our judicial system. I would cleanse it and purge it of so many of the anyway, I won't go into that, but basically I would turn it back into a restitution-based penal system and away from a incarceration-based penal system, and then that part would be functioning, and there would be very little that I would have to do at the border.
Yeah, I like this. I mean, this is the kind of thing I try and do when I'm writing my articles, which is, people talk about thinking outside the box, but when you actually go outside the box and find the solution to the problem in the box, outside the box, and you apply it in, and you see that the problem was completely everyone was assuming, was just looking at the problem in too small a way, right? Not getting, again, to the bigger causes, to the underlying corruption of principle that caused the thing that you're trying to deal with. And I love that you're doing that. It occurs to me, I'm kind of smirking a little bit here because, the left started to love you because you apparently went from being the militia guy to the resistance guy. But when the same people that hear that you're for open borders ultimately, that you're actually also for the end of a welfare state, maybe they're not going to like you so much.
That's what I'm saying. I'm in a really lonely position here.
Well, I don't know that. I know what you mean, Ammon. And yes, you're in a minority, but you're a minority that I think, basically broadly, I'm in. I mean, I profoundly agree with how you're constructing this argument. And I know most of the people that follow me, most of the people that book me to give speeches, are where you are, I think, on the principles. I mean, obviously, there are differences in how we deal currently, all the while we're in this unprincipled world. And I actually wrote an article called Purism Isn't Principled in an Impure World, where I try and deal with how to answer these questions of, when you can't have what it should be, how do you have the least bad? And I think good people who are working on the same or similar principles do sometimes answer those questions differently. But that's all fine, right? Because what you're doing is keeping us honest with respect to the principles. And however we do approach that, we can't lose sight of them. And we can't get caught up in the tribalism that motivated this interview in the first place.
Yeah, well, and then if you do get caught up into, those, then what happens is you just create more chaos and more confusion and more problems. And, the only way to crawl out of the mire is by keeping your eye on the principles and slowly moving towards them. You can't and I realize that things don't always move as fast as we want. And, government is big. There's 310 million people. And, 310 million, whatever it is, 330 or
something like that. Yeah.
And so, to just move quickly and make it, according to principle is difficult. But we have to do that. We don't have a choice if we're going to stay as a stay a nation. Actually, we have to do that. There is no choice. You cannot allow a welfare state, a police state, to keep growing to the point where individual freedom is completely snuffed out and where property means nothing to anybody. You can't do that. And then at the same time, you cannot allow the needs of a nation to override the right and the need of an individual. You just can't. Otherwise, you end up with what history has shown us.
Yeah. And, another way to say that perhaps is that, the greatest need of a nation, if you want to use that term, is the individual freedoms of the people that make it up. I mean, if you've got to stack needs, that's the one that has to be top of the list always, right? It's
That's right.
individual liberty.
The individual that you know, and that is opposite of collectivism.
Yes.
And you know, any major crime that's been committed, you know, genocide, or you know, which we know there's been over 100 million people in the 20th century that have been killed by their own government, right? Each one of them you go to, it was because the government was trying to enforce some type of collectivism, whether it was socialism, communism, you know, whatever, nationalism, fascism, some type of collectivism the state was trying to enforce and justified the genocide of hundreds of millions of people. And that's where it brings you.
You know, George Orwell, who actually identified as an international socialist, he actually wrote, he was very clear that all tyranny is about collectivism. You know, even as a socialist, so he had a different conception of socialism, perhaps from, you know, what people have when they use it today. But that's what he warned against. He warned against these collectivist orthodoxies, and that's why he warned against the dangers of people on his side, on the political left, because he saw this kind of arrogant collectivism and what it would do to the rights of the individual. And I actually wrote an article about that called "Authoritarians to the Right of Me, Authoritarians to the Left." And, you know, and what you're talking about, this collective mentality, we see it on the right, people call it the alt-right, and we see it on the left, the SJWs, the identitarian left, whatever you call it. It's there now, and it's you know, and that's the game, right? That's the real political game. It's, are you for individual freedom, or are you for some diffuse collective concept that you are going to give individual freedom up to allegedly defend? That's the only game in town. And I get that you get that, and I love it. And I've really enjoyed talking to you, Ammon. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, we've shot over an hour, so I'm going to close this here. Frankly, you've said a lot of great things that I could do another hour on each of them, but I don't want to keep you from your family, and it's probably long enough for an audience in one sitting. So maybe we'll talk again in the future. But this has been great, and I'm genuinely grateful for your time.
Light, I appreciate it. I'm gonna say one more thing for you to think about, and your audience to think about, and I'll think about it as well.
All right.
That are the rights of an individual determined upon the place of birth? And you know, think about that. Did God define that certain people have certain rights because they live in one place versus another? Because when you start to answer that, truly answer that, you start understanding the principles of what it takes to have, you know, good borders, boundaries between nations and between states and between, you know, your neighbor. And so I leave that with you.
Ammon, that's a beautiful last word. I'll take it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.